Welcome to Speak Easy Doctors, where we talk about life and how to navigate it with a little more communication. I'm Dr. J.
And I'm Dr. D. We're two BFFs with PhDs in communication, but most importantly, we're human beings figuring things out just like you.
From everyday conversations to life's bigger moments, we're here to explore how words shape our views, experiences, and relationships.
No scripts, no lectures, just honest conversations about life and speaking easier.
So, let's dive in. This is Speak Easy Doctors.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing shared here is intended as medical or mental health advice. One of the hosts is a licensed counselor, but the conversation should not replace professional care or therapy. Please consult a qualified healthcare provider for any personal concerns. Both hosts are PhDs in communication, and our goal in this podcast is to inform and inspire, not to diagnose or treat.
Hey, James, how are you doing today?
Why, I'm doing great today, Dr. D.
Good.
How are you?
Oh, yeah, we should probably be saying Dr. J and Dr. D. I am so used to just calling you James. I knew you before you were a PhDer.
Well, I guess to be quite honest, I'm not really a doctor, so I'm a fake doctor. I can't perform.
Stop.
Well, I can't perform open heart surgery or anything of that nature, so I guess I would be a fraud.
Well, I know when we were younger, we loved, what was that show?
ER.
Well, we loved ER together back when George Clooney was a young actor. And I remember us going, we wanted to be doctors, but little did we know we would become the doctors of communication.
Right. And that points to identity, wanting to be a doctor.
Yeah, that does point to identity. And today's podcast is going to be all about identity.
So communication theory of identity, CIT, Hecht, I believe, and then he's developed that. Multifaceted, something we share with ourselves and something we enact with others, something we perform. Yeah.
So let me talk a little bit about communication theory of identity, which, yeah, you're right. It's by Michael Hecht. And it's really the idea that identity is not a singular concept, but is multifaceted. It consists of 4 frames: the personal, the enacted, the relational, and the communal. So 4 frames of identity, for example. Number 1, personal. It's your individual self-perception of your personal values and beliefs. It's that sense of who I am. Then there's the enacted frame, which is the outward expression of your identity, which is how you react to others, right? It's how identity is performed. There's the relational frame, which is this frame highlights how identity is embedded in and shaped by relationships with others. So in our interactions with other people, our identity is also formed. And then there's the communal frame, which is the role of communities in shaping identity. So that includes cultures and group affiliations, just some shared characteristics that we might have with other groups. And now I'm thinking about how we watched ER.
No, absolutely. And for me, the character Carter, Noah Wiley, he was the one I wanted to be because I think I saw him grow so much, more so than any of the other characters. I really just liked his character arc. He became he was a very anxious 24, 25-year-old, and he turned into the head of the chief or whatever title they gave him. But he was a big deal in that hospital.
I do feel we're aging ourselves because a lot of times when people think about those medical dramas, they think about Grey's Anatomy. Because shortly after ER, Grey's Anatomy came out, and I just continued on with my ER love and thought about wanting to become a doctor because of Grey's Anatomy itself, too.
Okay. I never got into Grey's Anatomy, but...
Well, my favorite character... I think it was probably Meredith Grey, only because she was also tortured with family relational drama. Some of it was with her mom, and she was incredibly brilliant too. So, I like to model myself after really strong women. So maybe that's how I assumed some of that identity or tried to model myself in that identity.
So I think we should probably start in the beginning, maybe from childhood,
Yeah.
and thinking about earliest memories of wanting to be someone or identify as someone. And that can get back to the personal, the relational, the communal, enacted. How did the four of those or any one of those impact you? Think about Dr. D as a 4 or 5 year old. What are you doing? How are you performing your identity?
So this is going to be pretty personal. I unfortunately at that age witnessed my mother and father about to get a divorce. So in terms of identity, I would have to say that I watched a lot of yelling between two adults, and I watched a lot of emotion. And I don't know how I internalized that as an identity at all, but I definitely internalized the external world in a way that was fraught with conflict.
Can I ask a follow up? Did you yourself begin yelling to resolve conflict?
Um, I think eventually I did. So you see the formulation of fighting styles probably came from that interaction. At least that's my earliest recollection of how I would relate. So this is about the relational frame, right? How I would relate to others was embedded by the interactions between my mom and dad when they were getting a divorce. So if I were to look at who I am, that 4 or 5 year old watched a relational frame, and some form of my identity started to understand the world as fraught with conflict. And the part of me then, and I'm going to go over more ways that I gathered my identity since then, because that's what children do is they adapt to their environment. And more ways was formulating the idea that do I need to be a hero? And searching for what heroes look like as I was growing up watching television. Or did I need to be a fixer? And looking back, I mean, at 4 years old, you're not aware of that. But
Sure.
looking back now as a mature adult, I look back and I go, oh my gosh, I formulated myself in these ways to understand my external world and to adapt to that external world of conflict.
That was very well said. It sounds like you were reading from a script almost. That's how good you are at communicating.
Well, we all plan this all the time.
Of
Just
course.
kidding.
No, I know.
Well, tell me about yourself. Like, how did you form your identity in those early years?
Well, very similar to you. There was yelling in the house. However, it was always the women in the house were yelling and the men would sit there and I guess just absorb it. And so that was a communication style I developed. The men are just supposed to, I, I guess for lack of a better term, just consume the anger. And then because we're Catholic, you repress all of it. You push all of it down. And then later on, it manifests itself in passive aggressive behavior. And that was kind of how I grew up. And I remember searching for a lot of escapism when I was younger. So Star Wars was kind of one of those. Luke Skywalker, he still is my person, my go-to person. And I always wanted to be him because I think because of his character arc, he grew from this kind of anxious little kid to someone who was very mature and calm. And that's how I wanted to be. And so I started to identify with that and speaking in certain language, speaking, I guess, more adult style language. And that could also be part of the ism, which I'd been told many a time. So trying to adopt adult-like language when I was younger. Of course, we didn't know anything about that during the 1980s, but yes.
I also think that in our generation, I think about some of the shows and movies of our generation, the adult-like language was prevalent. I notice, for example, there's a movie that my husband loves, Clerks, and I
Yes.
rewatched it and I thought, wow, there's a lot of verbosity in these movies.
Yeah, but I don't know how common it was because I do remember children making fun of me when I was speaking certain ways. I didn't know how to speak as a child.
How did you know to use the more grown-up language? What got you to understand that this is the way, or how did you learn actually that was grown-up language?
That's how the way I learned it was grown up language was with people telling me that's not normal. What are you saying? You sound like an idiot. You know, that's
So
basically what
grown-up language sounds like an idiot at times.
they would make fun of me. Yes, because I wasn't
Aw.
communicating with a proper childlike language. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that, well, I am the oldest and I did serve kind of as a surrogate husband. I was always, when my mom wanted to go somewhere, she always took me instead of my father. So, and I think she relied on me for that more so than him. And I guess, I don't know if she saw me as more mature than him. I don't know. But so, and part of it does have to do with, and I know we'll talk about being brown and identity. Part of it was also, it was not enough to speak English. You had to speak English with a very, very high level of proficiency to illustrate that you're not, I don't know, I'm trying to think of how to say this in a non-racist way, but you don't have a Spanish accent.
So you felt the pressure of basically being Mexican, because that's your background, right? You felt the
Right.
pressure of being Mexican without, for some reason, there was some sort of rule placed on you, and that could be a communal frame. That could be parts of society, right?
Right.
The way that communities shape our identity. So that communal frame is telling you speak it with less or speak with less of a Spanish accent.
Right. And I do remember standing in front of the mirror trying to enunciate certain words properly. My family still says certain words, my parents in particular, certain words like sandwich, like, hey, give me a sandwich. So I remember standing in front of the mirror, hello, I would like a sandwich, please. And just trying to eliminate those types of little linguistic elements.
You were so thoughtful as a kid to think through, and it seems like also a lot of energy to do that. You know, you're constantly thinking about ways to get around how you would speak.
And I was very anxious as a child. And I remember watching the British Broadcasting Corporation because I thought Terence Stamp, do you know the actor Terence Stamp? I thought that
No?
he was Zod in Superman. He was also in Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Anyways, he had this very eloquent way of speaking, and that was what I wanted to emulate.
Hmm.
Kneel before Zod. You don't remember that, Superman?
So did
No?
you go around? I just imagine you as a little kid going, you must kneel, bend the knee.
But that's how I was speaking. I was trying to emulate. I thought that was the proper way to speak English. And Orson Welles, too, was another person. And I was just emulating their language because I thought that was the proper way to speak. And I didn't know any better.
That's so fascinating.
You know what's also interesting is I think sometimes your skin tone is a performance. And I don't know, you've probably faced this when you were younger. When we were playing Star Wars, I was not allowed to be Luke Skywalker because I did not have blonde hair or blue eyes.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Your skin tone is a performance, because
Of
that
course.
to me goes back to CTI, communication theory of identity.
CIT. Yes.
Yeah, or it says CTI,
It says CTI.
communication theory. Yeah.
You are
Well, we
correct,
can.
sir. Ma'am. Yes, I apologize.
That's okay.
You have bested me once again.
All these acronyms are horrible. They just divide us.
Very true. Yes.
So it reminds me of something called the enacted frame, right? It's our outward
Correct.
expression of identity. And obviously, being brown or being white or being black, those are things that we cannot change. And they are, like you said, performative.
Right.
They're a reflection of our identity. But I want to ask you this. Do you think that it's always true? That these reflections are always true or sometimes true?
I think it really depends on the context. I guess, no, they're probably not always true, but I think there are certain expectations people have of you based on your skin tone. I remember when I was young, for soccer, I got picked first. Do you know why?
Why?
Because I'm brown. They assumed that I would know how to play soccer because I was from a Latin American country.
And did you?
No.
Fascinating. I'm so sorry.
It's
So,
okay.
so you watched their disappointment as a child, and how
I
did that make
did.
you feel?
Not good. Well, I had the long legs, like the soccer players have, and, oh, he's Mexican. He must know more than I do. I guess it would be akin to having a black person. No, they must know how to play basketball. Some very similar. You have a
Or
certain skin tone.
Asians,
Or
like
Asian.
myself, where
Yes.
I should already know math very,
Correct.
very well. which was true to
Correct.
one point in my life until I hit, I think, calculus. And I'm like, I don't like
Yeah.
math.
Right. So there are these expectations. The other thing is Spanish too. I think there's an expectation my Spanish will be perfect, and I can get by, but people know I'm not a native speaker. So I think it's
See,
got me into problems as well.
so that's what makes me think about how things that are enacted or things that are placed on us, they're performative, like our color, our skin color, how
Mhm.
we outwardly express who we are. That to me, I think the communal frame or the communities and groups and cultures, they actually, I don't know if I can say this correctly, they are the ones that um, shape the enacted frame. And I don't think I like that. I don't think I like the fact that these groups and communities can say just because you're brown, you are good at soccer. And I think this is a logical fallacy for so many interactions and so many ways that we perceive others. And what do you think about that?
I just think it's the way the brain we're hardwired to see differences and yeah, for to recognize those differences because oftentimes I guess when the amygdala is working, the part of the brain you want to detect difference because there might potentially be a danger there. But I
Yeah,
think
I
it's
see the
just
biological argument for it, but I
right.
also know that we can reroute the way that our brain works or reroute the neurological pathways so we can think differently. And that's why being a human being is so amazing as a species.
Right. And whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. Morally, I don't know. Stereotypes, I don't know.
Yeah. Um, yeah, because I got to tell you, I think about our political climate right now, and I think about how I'm living in the South, and automatically people will perceive, based on your color, what identity you likely are, or what political identity, I mean, that you are.
Oh, exactly. Absolutely. 100%. So, people do assume, well, you're Mexican, you're from Los Angeles, you must be extreme liberal.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's unfair. I am very much a moderate. So I do something called issues-based thinking. So every single policy that people come up to me with, and if I have some knowledge about, my response is always nuanced and it is not clearly Republican or Democrat. But that's another kind of topic. But what I'm trying to say is I take issue with these communal frames or these communities that are shaping how they're shaping perceptions of others based on how they look.
Now, since we are speaking about identity performance, I do want to ask you about your high school years. What were you like in high school? How did you perform your identity? And that could be language, that could be clothing, that could be any number of things.
Oh gosh, high school. On the one hand, I was raised partially in Southern California. And on the other hand, I had periods of my life where I was raised in South Carolina. So my dichotomy runs between Southern California and Southern culture. So my freshman year of high school, I was in South Carolina. And for all intents and purposes, being the only California girl that moved to South Carolina, it was like a reset because prior to that, I was a big nerd. I had pimples. I was in middle school. Nobody liked me. I went to South Carolina. All of a sudden, people thought I was pretty. And I thought, wow, when did this happen? So my identity was reflected based on all these reactions, the relational frame, right? The way that people were reacting towards me. And all of a sudden, I had this concept of a positive self concept of myself. Whereas before that, I was the biggest nerd, isolated, read a lot of books. And I'll talk about this in my life because it's not that I was always that way during childhood. Since my family moved so much, my mother tended to move every 1 to 2 years of my life. So I was constantly shifting in my identity during my younger years. It was a relational frame that colored my perspective of myself. So one school I'd be considered a nerd. So then I was a nerd. And another school, oh wow, you're so cool. Like you're different. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I'm cool and different. And I think ultimately when you asked me about what was I like in high school, at that point I learned I was a chameleon. I could shift between these different perspectives and understand myself in relation to others. And that was just my freshman. Then I went back to Southern California as a sophomore, and that was like everybody was skinny. And I was in the area where the kids of some of the people in the movie industry. So I was back to being not so cool by that point. So yeah, overall, it's about shifting. I had shifting identities based on those relational frames. What about you?
I really leaned into my love of music in high school. So I remember growing up, my hair was long and I wore tight pants. I wore silk shirts. And I stood out, which I didn't know at the time. And I didn't really understand sarcasm when people would say nice pants or nice hair. Thank you very much. And, yeah. And again, still speaking the way I did because I was reading so much and I isolated myself a lot. I didn't have a whole lot of friends in high school. Um, Yeah, I remember there was my first year as a freshman. I didn't know anyone. I just remember walking around high school. During lunch, I would just walk around the campus. Because I didn't know anyone. So it was a little lonely, but, yeah, and I stood out and I didn't know that at the time. And it wasn't until later that I started to understand my relation to other people. So yeah,
So, one of the key tenets of the communication theory of identity is the idea that communication is identity,
right,
right? And that by that, they mean that identity is enacted through how we communicate, and that meaning, the meaning that we ascribe to our interactions with each other and how we perform with each other, it actualizes our identity. It reaffirms our identity as well. So we are
right,
not only emitting fragments of who we are out into this world when we interact, but we're also reaffirming and taking in from others, right?
right. So, and I think I became very aware of that. What do they call that? Theory of mind, I think, when you become aware of other people and contextual. There was a huge shift for me right after high school. I had a really bad breakup in high school. My first girlfriend was in high school. And when I was a senior and I had the long hair and everything, I thought everything was going great. And then there was that rejection. And then I started recognizing rejection from other people. This started kind of a trend where I really wanted to be liked by everyone. And I just wanted to fit in. So I remember cutting my hair, getting a regular haircut that everyone had during the 90s, dressing without the tight pants or silk shirts, maybe trying to use language a little differently to fit in a little bit more, starting to lean into the Mexican American identity a little bit more. Yeah, so I guess trying to be normal or what I thought was normal at the time. And this
Speak
was,
to that. Yeah. Tell me about what that might have sounded or looked like.
well, I remember altering my voice a little bit to when I would meet someone, for instance, like, "Hey, I'm James. How you doing? Good to meet you." Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Right. Yeah. No, yeah. How's it going? Yeah. So starting to use that intonation a little bit more so I didn't stand out as much because I remember when I was around people, who especially were Mexican American, they would tell me I didn't sound Mexican and I sounded too white and I wasn't a good ambassador for our culture. So I needed to shift that a little bit. Yeah, funny enough too, I remember we had Match.com back in our day. We don't have all these fancy dating apps now. And I did meet a girl. She was Mexican Catholic and she thought I was decent looking. So she went on a date with me. And when we met, she was very disappointed and she told me my voice was annoying and that I didn't sound Mexican at all. That hurt a little.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think again, it goes back to expectations. You have a certain amount of melanin in your skin and there's an expectation you speak a certain way or dress a certain way. And I certainly didn't dress with the cowboy boots or the traje charros or the gayara shirts. I didn't wear any of those. So yeah,
So there was just a lot of tension between um, how you'd shift from one identity, and sometimes you would try to modify the way you talked so that you were less of that identity. There was always something, I feel like there was always a pressure on you shaped by some form of from society or a culture or whatever. And then people would criticize you for trying to fit in. So tell
Right.
me, who were you really, though? Like, if you were to look back then, who is...
And that's the issue that I'm dealing with right now. Much like you were a chameleon, I was shifting always just to ensure that there was no conflict. So if I were around people that were extremely liberal, I was liberal. If I was around people that were extremely conservative, I was conservative. And I tried to fit in as much as possible. It didn't always work. But yeah, I remember working at a music store. Everyone was Mexican American and everyone loved rap. And here I am with my 1970s progressive rock. And I tried to fit in as much as possible, but it was very difficult.
So it's so interesting you talk about tensions. For me, it was about erasing that, like looking back, I don't think I was aware of it at the time, but living in South Carolina, I felt like sometimes I was trying to erase who I was rather than feel comfortable with who I was. Remember, this is in the 90s, right? So we didn't have really social media at the time. We had beepers.
I
We had
do.
a
Pagers, yeah.
different, but we didn't have access to a lot of different information and ideas. Things were still provocative back then. We were trying to work towards not having as much censorship as a society, if I recall correctly. There was a fight against censoring music and censoring a lot of different, like, for example, gangster rap back then. People were censoring that and saying it was bad, but it was really about artists talking about their actual lives. And there was that push and pull in our world. But during my high school years, I was trying to erase who I was because it was uncomfortable. But I'm not saying this as culturally, because I know from you, your tensions are cultural. My tensions were more from a standpoint of classism. I did not have a lot of money. My parents were divorced. Mind you, my dad was a doctor in the Philippines, but when he came to the United States, as much of the immigrant experience can be, it was not easy to translate being doctor or some other country here in the United States because there's a lot of, I guess you could say, bureaucratic issues, and it's a long journey to get to being able to be board certified here. So he never became a doctor here. And so when he left my mom, who was also very enterprising in the Philippines, came here and she's working 3 jobs now. And we still, growing up, lived in an apartment with cockroaches and shared one bed. And yes, my life has changed since then. And even my mother has grown to the point where by my 20s, she had her own business in Newport Beach in a very ritzy area. But I will say this, that journey I watched from poverty to that kind of abundance. I wasn't experiencing that as a high schooler. In fact, it was my biggest shame is to not have the best shoes or to not have the things or to not have a nuclear family. Is that the right
It
term?
is, yes.
Mom and dad and
White picket fence, the
the
dog,
white picket.
yes.
I didn't have any of that. So I didn't have so much cultural tension or ethnic tension as much as I had class tension and building. I think back then I was starting to build the identity of needing to prove I was more than what I grew up with.
And I think that's really interesting because both of us are pointing to we're performing something that we're not. So our identity is solely reliant on the external and not necessarily who we are, because I think we're both trying to literally perform something rather than being something. But I think I can speak for both of us when I say I think we're trying to find our identities more so now than we had in the past. High school and early 20s. And we talked about this
Well,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I think finding identity now, I believe if you're a person that likes to grow, your identity will always shift. Your identity will always grow. In fact, I wonder if the whole idea of a person that is a growth-oriented person is an identity. Does
I,
that make sense?
yeah,
Yeah.
the continual shifting, the ever changing.
Right. And so in a lot of ways, maybe I took the chameleon aspect and now I'm starting to formulate and stand in the power of really I really love different cultures. I love different environments. When I think about class now, I think there's beauty in, I don't know, I don't like to say the word hierarchy, but it is what it is. There are hierarchies when it comes to class, and I think there's beauty and a downfall in every part of that system. And I think being able to understand what people struggle with is now, I guess it's like a part of my identity. So it's important to me to be a chameleon. So I am not judging from the standpoint of a higher socioeconomic status or a lower one. So when I say when you say finding identity, I maybe am now accepting that my identity is all of those things and all of those experiences, and it doesn't need to have a label
Right.
necessarily.
Yeah, I understand that. I think I'm the same way too, starting to understand it's okay to be who I am and I don't necessarily have to shift based on who I'm around necessarily. I think when you grow older too, there's been certain people that I'm really no longer close to. And I think there's a reason for that because oftentimes when I was around them, I did have to perform around those people. And fortunately, you are not one of those people. So I feel very comfortable around you. And like I said, it's only within the past year or two I've really started to gain a sense of who I am instead of just trying to be. I don't know if I'm always going to want to be that peacemaker, the one who just agrees with everything for the sake of not having conflict, or if that might shift. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and do you have to perform for people now? Do you feel like that's still a thing?
I don't feel it as much now. I don't feel like I need to perform the Mexican American identity, or masculinity has always been a big one for me because I wasn't the most masculine child or most masculine high schooler. I mean, I was very thin. I had long hair. I liked to talk about emotions and poetry, and I think part of me trying to be more masculine, I started really enjoying the Raiders because I thought that was an in to be more masculine, and also to kind of share that with my family as well, share that with my father in particular, show that I'm kind of a real man, I suppose. I don't know. So, and that's a big Mexican thing. People in Mexico really love the Raiders. So,
I'm
yeah.
really struck by, even though we have different tensions that have formed our identity, different frames that have formed our identity, for you, it's the whole idea of masculine and feminine and cultural identity as a Mexican American. And mine is more of, class system. And really, I didn't feel as much cultural tension, although I'm sure it was there. But it's just explaining my identity. I don't go straight to culture, which is maybe problematic in its own right and maybe something I should look at. But I do go to, for me, the sense of accomplishment and goal orientedness that comes from that perceived class system that I was living in when I was a child.
And I do remember, yeah, the first podcast we did a couple of weeks ago when we were asking, who are you? You said, my work, my job. And that was immediately how you identified yourself. I am what I do for a living. So I thought
Right.
that was interesting. And that's oftentimes how you identify yourself when you are posting on social media. Hey, I'm doing this or I'm doing that. These are the things I'm
Yeah.
showing that you're worthy because you contribute to society.
Right. And that worthiness stems from these relational frames, these identities that I've formed not only with my family and obviously the society and the people I went to high school with, and being a child with not as much the communal frame, for example, the cultures and groups in the schools. That identity is really formed by for me. Now I'm going to go straight to it. I think it was formed by survival,
Right.
being
And
able to pull myself through some of these challenges as a young person, coming from a mom and a dad that divorced, and then having to have lived through some pretty impoverished settings, to all the way up to today, and even my mom moving herself through and becoming a successful businesswoman eventually. That kind of movement growing up is, I think, one of the things that has motivated me into this identity, right?
right.
So
And
my performance is what I do, I guess. That's
exactly. And I think that's maybe how you justify your worth and your value in the world because I'm doing all of these things. And I imagine there's a pressure on you as well maybe?
There used to be.
Okay, but
There
now
used to be a pressure. I think I figured out, and this was because of an autoimmune disease I had that made me slow down immensely when I couldn't. And that will be another story. But
sure.
I had an illness that left me unable to walk for 8 months. And I really had to sit with myself and go, what is the reason behind all this movement? This A-type personality who had to go and do. What was the reason, right? And today, it's really about something that I learned. I love Oprah. When I think about how she communicates and interviews and tells a story, the one thing that she used to say was, I want to always do this with intention. So instead of worth, which is something I don't look at anymore for why I do things, I look at intention. For me, it's important that my action continues to have energy in it. And it's not just energy for myself to make me feel better. Because I actually realize that when I do things like that, I feel more empty inside. So if I do things with the intention of, I want to get this story out so people can see what others are going through, then that becomes a lot more energetic. And my self-worth is a lot more robust because of that, rather than, oh, I'm a good person. I mean,
Right. And that drains a lot of energy if the motivation is solely for external purposes, meaning you're trying to appease someone, which I was doing that for the longest time. And it's only until recently I've started to say, okay, well, I want to do this because I want to do this, rather than there's a fear I'm going to upset someone. And I just would always communicate that I'm a very laid back person that will just accept whatever other people want for the sake of avoiding conflict. But that's kind of part of my identity. But now I'm starting to understand, I do like peace and safety and avoiding conflict, but I'm doing that now because that's who I am, not because I'm solely wanting to appease
everyone.
Right.
Yeah. I will tell you that I am more emboldened now when I don't care about validating my self-worth. I am just doing it for the sake of love and passion now. Anything that I choose to do.
Right. And I've become better at setting boundaries and saying no, which is something I could not do for the longest time. And that caused so much pain. And yeah.
Yeah. I guess, well, let's tell the world this is what the communication theory of identity is all about.
Yeah.
It's how we frame our identity and who we are. We've got the personal frame of who we are.
Internal view.
Yeah. Our enacted frame is just how we perform it to others, whether that's by skin color or other things. And then you've got the relational frame and how we interact with each other. Our relationships with our parents and our friends and our family is really, really does shape what we think of ourselves. And then the communal frame, which is cultures, perceptions about cultures, political affiliations, group affiliations. And for me, it could be career. All these different perceptions do formulate our identity. But I think what's important, and I really want to share this because I'm such an advocate for communication, is that communication is identity too. It's how we express who we are on the inside, and also how we absorb who we are, right? So what we say to others is meaningful. We take that meaning and we internalize it. And I think people, if you realize what you say matters, I hope that it emboldens you to want to be kinder to everybody else.
Right. And regardless of who you are, you have something important to say, just like you mentioned.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you for joining us in our second episode of Speakeasy Doctors. I hope you join us next time.
Wait, Dr. D, I have to tell you,
What?
I applaud you for your efforts. Yes. Okay. That's all. All right. Sorry.